the state of New Hampshire, according to the latest U.S. Census, which was done in 2010, has 1.3 million people. Out of that 1.3 million people, 1.1% identified as African American. From a scale perspective, that means that they could all fit in the Carrier Dome and there would still be room for whoever else wanted to go watch a game. When I tell people I grew up in New Hampshire, everyone is incredulous. They are shocked by this notion, but they also don't know what to say. Which is weird because that's not how you would treat anyone else who is from a different place. So when they struggle, I let them. Questions like, or how did you live here? Or why? I don't know, I didn't choose it. I let them stumble in front of me and I watch. But more broadly to them, I'm still an exception because they've never met anyone like me that looks like me from where I claim to be from. That's okay, and it was until I started to get older and the exception became the problem. This first started happening in middle school when I would have parent-teacher conferences. My mom is a boisterous Trinidadian woman, and like most West Indian mothers, they are high-caliber problem solvers. This means that you don't know who the problem is, but you know if it's you or someone else, it will be solved. How it will be solved, you have no idea, but it will get dealt with. This particular situation, I didn't know I was the problem until my teacher, who I thought I was friends with, said something that triggered my mom and my own demise. He said that I was causing an issue in class. She paused, looked at him, looked into my soul. I looked for an exit. The window was too high. She would catch me before the door, so this was where I end. He went on, Mr. Jackson, Jonathan, he asks too many questions in class, and he sort of derails where the class is going with his questions, and I think it would be better if, he kept on track. She paused again. I wrote my obituary. Then she looked up and said something I will never, ever forget. She said, we teach our children to ask as many questions as they like, and we do not pretend to know the answers. We can provide them where to look. I would hope that you, as his teacher, would be more interested in directing him in where he should go than limiting his ability to be curious. That's why we pay you tuition. He didn't know what to do. It was funny, but it was insidious. It was the first time I realized that what my mother was doing was protecting me from the violent benevolence of someone who had the audacity to act as if I should be more like their idea of me than who I actually am. This curiosity kept becoming a friction point for most of my teachers, and it landed me in places I couldn't imagine. I moved from school to school, and I ended up, off the advice of one of my brother's friends, applying to boarding school because I had this notion of a what if. What if I got a chance to be in a smaller class size, or what if I could get a scholarship and get into an environment that was a little different than anything I'd ever seen before? I got in on a big scholarship. It was awesome. I was 15. I'm away from home. Every 15-year-old thinks they're an adult. It's lit. I'm trying to make friends. 2 months in, it stopped being interesting, and my life changed. I was playing football. I had begged to play football. I was on the JV team. I made a tackle. And then I remember being on the sidelines. I can't remember how I got there, but I had this crazy headache, and I didn't know why. So I went to the trainer's office. I got a concussion test. I failed. They said, don't worry, come back. It happens. You're playing football. I then failed 9 tests in succession. I went to see a specialist. Test came back negative. Went to see another specialist. He sat me down with my parents and said, Jonathan, I think you have semi-permanent brain damage. I said, well, what does that mean? I'm 15. He said, your brain hit the front of your skull. Out of all 100 of these, I usually see 1 sustained semi-permanent. That means that your short-term memory is irrevocably affected. It means that you're going to have light sensitivity. You're going to have headaches you can't recover from, and your mood will fluctuate at times you cannot control. I had been at school for 2 months, fresh in the 10th grade. I cannot describe to you what that felt like, so I'll give you some examples. I went from being fairly affable as a person to needing to carry 3 different planners at once because I didn't remember where I was. I would go to class, forget what class I was in. I'd have to get the other planner to remind me. I'd forget what we were learning that day, even though I wrote it in the first planner. And then I'd have to go back to my room to center myself to remember what day it was. I used to not want to go to sleep because I felt like I was the only person who would wake up and forget more than they actually did the day before. It was a spigot that couldn't turn off. I was trapped by my mind and my circumstance. But that's not what hurt the most. What hurt the most wasn't the tackle, it was the whispers. It was the, he's not like all the other black kids. He's from New Hampshire, so he'd probably get over it. He's probably trying to fake it. I heard that that's how they get more tuition money. If you can just get more, you can get on disability. I heard that's what they do. I had no ability to block that. But I remembered something about that day with my mom and that teacher that tried to tell me who I wasn't. I remember that if I asked what if, everything would shift for me. I was too weak to do anything else, but I started asking, what if there was a different narrative? What if there was a different story? What if I could figure out a way to leapfrog this circumstance and still make the most of it? Because I was tired of feeling like a failure. See, I was a somebody who needed anybody to tell me that I was worth something, but I had to tell myself. So I had this crazy idea. I wrote the board who oversaw which students were moving to the future grades. I wrote them a letter. In that letter, I said, I do not believe that I have achieved what I was here to do. With that in mind, please let me repeat the 10th grade. I'm young enough to do it. I believe I have added commensurate value to this community, and I believe I need another chance to show me. Something was stolen from me that I couldn't control, and I want it all back. I didn't know what would happen, so I waited. They said yes. I repeated the 10th grade. It was the best decision I had ever made because at the onset it felt like I was holding myself back, but what I really did was restart my own narrative. What I really did was take so much agency over my own life that I would never let another person that drew breath tell me what I could and could not do. All you are able to do is comment on who I am. And sometimes I don't even listen to that. From there, different things started happening. I came alive. I joined student council. I made new friends. I joined new sports team. I set some records in track and field. I became Jonathan, not the problem. But there were still issues. See, my guidance counselor, when I was applying to college, hadn't seen someone like me. He looked at my transcripts, and he thought that I should maybe apply to some schools that were more in my range. See, there's that violent benevolence again. It's that subtle yet soft and really damaging thing that happens to people like me who go through things that other people can only comment on and in their best spirit try to remind me that it would be safer if I took less risks, not ever having to deal with the consequences that I already incurred. The nerve of someone to wonder why I'm upset and try to limit my options at the same time. I ignored him, and I got into the school I wanted to go to. You see, that same what if brought me a community at that school. After that what if and that community, I went to a company on the West Coast that I couldn't even dream about. That same what if let me listen to a friend who had an idea about building a company that we ended up building. And so my life changed as I kept letting myself ask, what if? Regardless of what someone thought and how exceptional I appeared to be, none of that mattered. It's taken me across the world. It's helped me build a company. It's changed my life. But what happens now is something a little unsettling. You see, now that I am a different type of exception and I'm welcomed for my gifts, I actually get pitted against people who might not have had the same options. You see, people say, well, if you were more like Jonathan, then these things would happen. Nothing is further from the truth. You see, the thing I realized about growing up in spaces that weren't for you was that there is no perfect space. It doesn't matter where or when or how. If you don't design it from the inside out, it will never be for you. What makes a space perfect is the fact that I breathe into it and I exhale and I still can stand my ground wherever I am. Most of us don't actually have our success in aggregate for someone. Your neighborhood, your street corner, your building, your family, your community, whatever thing moves you, brings you life, wakes you up on the days you don't feel like being who you actually need to be, but you choose to anyway, that's the thing. It is worthy being protected of, nurtured. That's what people did to me. When I needed to be planted, they watered me, and I grew, and I've kept growing. What I needed then is what I will say now, because 15-year-old Jonathan that was dealing with an anxiety disorder and 20 milligrams of the citalopram every single day so I could find some stability, what he needed to hear was this. Your ability to articulate yourself isn't for them. Your pain is not to be commented on. And the creativity that you build seemingly out of nowhere has nothing to do with what people think they gave you. It has everything to do with what you were born with. Anything less than that is a lie. When people look at your cracks and they try to take things from you, you have to remember that cracks are the only way you see sunlight. They are the only things that allow you to be imbued with the things that no one can take from you. It doesn't matter where. It doesn't matter how. All that matters is why. And when they would make you seem different or vilify you for taking what you needed and building something out of it and remixing, remember this. Schooling is not the same thing as education. Schooling is prescriptive. Education is you figuring out what you need, taking it, doubling it, and then giving it back to the people that had less than you. That's what makes you unstoppable. And outside of all of those things, I would have you remember and repeat it to yourself so often that it gets tattooed on the imprint of your heart. You will never, ever, ever answer outside of your name to anyone, at any time, anywhere. Thank you.